Good evening. My name is Joe Yasharoff. I'm the Director of Content at Montgomery Community Media. Happy New Year and welcome to tonight's County Executive Candidates Forum. Montgomery Community Media is very pleased to partner with Renters Alliance to bring this very important event to our community. For those unfamiliar, MCM is Montgomery County's Emmy Award-winning nonprofit media access organization. We provide media content, services, and education to county residents. We encourage everyone to learn more about us at MyMCmedia.org and to subscribe on YouTube and Facebook. You'll find news stories about Montgomery County that we produce daily in English and Spanish. You'll also find local programs produced by us and by county residents. You can also learn about us, our media training classes and facilities that we offer for your use. Finally, MCM brings production services to other nonprofits like Renters Alliance and helps them deliver valuable information, programs, and events like this one that benefit the residents of Montgomery County. Please visit mymcmedia.org today and take advantage of the valuable content we offer. Find out how you can support our mission to provide access to media for all residents of Montgomery County. Hope you enjoy the forum, and now, Provost Margaret Latimer from Montgomery College, Germantown.
Good evening and Happy New Year. I had hoped to greet you in person this evening on the beautiful Germantown campus, but I am grateful for the technology, Montgomery Community Media, and to the Renters Alliance that allows me to welcome you to this important event on behalf of Montgomery College. Montgomery College will continue to play a critical role in Montgomery County's bright future as we open the doors to opportunity, developing the homegrown talent that powers the county's economic engine. Our students represent the rich diversity of this county. They are the homegrown talent and our future. They are renters. To the Renters Alliance, thank you for your advocacy on their behalf, for opening doors, literally. Thank you for this opportunity to hear our candidates for county executive this evening. And now, Brandy Brooks from the Renters Alliance Board of Directors.
Thank you so much, Provost Latimer. And greetings and thank everyone who's joining us for being here at the Montgomery County Renters Alliance 2022 County Executives Candidate Forum. My name is Brandy Brooks, and I'm a renter, a racial justice and environmental justice organizer, and a proud Renters Alliance board member. We're here tonight because renters vote, and we want to know how the candidates you'll hear from this evening are going to listen and respond to the voices and interests of renters as they make their case for why they should lead our county. I've been a renter for my entire adult life, more than 25 years. When I moved to Montgomery County with my family, finding a home within our budget that we could rent together allowed us to support one another through all the ups and downs that families face, from health challenges to watching my niece grow up to navigating job losses and starting new businesses. Today, all of us still rent our homes here in the county and are active students, workers, business owners, and activists. We are part of the nearly 40% of Montgomery County residents who rent their homes. Despite being a huge proportion of our population, renters are routinely deprioritized in how we think about housing. Too many times, the public discourse around housing still treats renters as transient residents who aren't really invested in their communities, and rental housing as a less preferable way to live than a single-family home. The result is public policy that disadvantages renters, makes us more vulnerable to unsafe housing conditions, and makes it more likely that we will face housing insecurity. We are facing an ongoing affordable housing and eviction crisis in Montgomery County, one that has only been made worse by the pandemic. Right now, more and more people who have been working in our communities and raising their families are facing the traumatic loss of their homes due to eviction, making it harder for kids to go to school, for adults to go to work, for seniors and people with special needs to have accessible and safe places to live, and for all of us to stay healthy in the midst of the Omicron surge. We are in urgent need of real solutions that effectively address the crises Montgomery County residents are facing. Solutions that keep us in our homes and our communities so we can support our families and our economy. Tonight, you'll hear from candidates with a wide range of experiences and viewpoints. My questions for each one of them are the same. What have you done to help renters stay safe, protected, and in our homes as we face challenging times and work to provide for our loved ones in our community? And what will you do as county executive to make sure that we are valued, supported, and listened to as we contribute every day to the county we live in and love? We at the Renters Alliance know that stable, quality housing is central to community health, welfare, and prosperity. We urge everyone to pay close attention to the views of our county executive candidates. And most importantly, we urge everyone to participate in our democracy and vote in the primary election on June 28th. And now it is my pleasure to introduce the chair of the Montgomery County Renters Alliance Board of Directors, William Roberts, who will moderate tonight's forum.
Thank you, Brandy, and good evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining us virtually. And let us begin. Tonight's forum will begin with questions from our reporter panel, followed by questions we've received from the public. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond to each question, and will have 1 minute of rebuttal or response if they so choose. You'll need to physically raise your hands, candidates, and I see you up here in my boxes. And I'll do my best to keep us all on time so we have a substantive and timely discussion tonight. So first, let me welcome our candidates and then our reporter panel. For the county executive candidates, we have with us in alphabetical order, David Blair, Marc Elrich, Tom Hucker, and Hans Riemer. And for our reporter panel, we have with us Mike Morello from WTOP, Andrew Schatz from Bethesda Beat, and Rebecca Tan from the Washington Post. So let's start with each candidate introducing themselves in a minute or less, and followed by our reporter panel in that same alphabetical order. And I believe you all can see the timer there, which will be my best friend this evening. So let's start with you, Mr. Blair, for your opening remarks.
Good evening, and thank you, Renters Alliance and co-sponsors, for hosting this evening's event. I'm a lifelong Montgomery County resident, and I certainly know firsthand what an amazing place Montgomery County is, whether it's our incredible schools, wide open spaces, our progressive values, and our welcoming and inclusive nature. And so it's with that perspective, I see that our county's not working for everyone. And so as you are all aware, we're in an eviction crisis. We lack affordable housing. We have over 20,000 severely cost-burdened renters, most of them making less than half of the median income. There's no doubt we can and should be doing better. The good news, we have all the talent and know-how right here to address the lack of affordable housing and the eviction crisis. We've just lacked the ability to get things done. I've spent my entire career as an executive leading teams to do extraordinary things. And that's the leadership I'll bring as your county executive. I'm grateful to be here with you this evening, exploring how we can make Montgomery County better for our renters. Thank you.
You, Mr. Blair. Mr. Elrich.
Good evening, and if my voice is gravelly, excuse me, I've got COVID. I've been involved in affordable housing in Montgomery County since the early 1980s when I moved to Tacoma Park. I started the tenant organizing. I got elected to the council there in 1987. I was involved in saving the rent stabilization law that Tacoma Park had, which to this day continues to provide a wealth of affordable housing that no place else in the county can actually match. I organized tenants to buy their own buildings because I recognize that it's not enough just to protect somebody's rent, but the real path out of poverty is trying to move people into ownership. And so I spend time doing that. When I got on the county council and met Matt Losek, Ike Leggett had just put out his report on affordable housing, and Matt and I realized the report was done with no tenants. It was completely detuned from the tenant population in Montgomery County. And successfully, we got Mr. Leggett to convene another panel and create another workforce to come up with a report on the real affordable housing needs of Montgomery County. The tenants, what they needed in terms of affordability and what they needed in terms of tenant rights. So I've been at this a long time. I'm deeply committed to this. And I know the difference between make-believe and real.
Thank you, Mr. Elrich. Mr. Hucker. You're on mute, Mr. Hucker.
Sorry, you'd think I'd have that down by now. Thank you, Will, and the Renters Alliance for organizing this. Hope you're feeling better, Mark. My name is Tom Hucker. Good evening, everybody. As a longtime tenant myself, I've been fighting for renters my entire career as a tenant and community organizer, as the founding executive director of Progressive Maryland, as a state delegate, and then on the county council where I just finished serving as the council president. I'm glad Brandy asked about our record because I have an unmatched record of supporting renters and keeping them safe. Just in the last 2 years, I have passed 4 new laws to protect tenants. One to allow tenants to break their lease without penalty if they have mold or vermin. Another law to require window guards in our buildings to protect young children from window falls because we've lost too many children in Montgomery County. I also passed the nation's first county law to require air conditioning in apartments, so we no longer have tenants suffering and dying in unair-conditioned apartments, and another to require the replacement of dangerous gas systems that caused the tragic and inexcusable explosion at Flower Branch Apartments. My message is we have 300,000 renters, and they deserve the same compassion and attention and care from the county executive's office that homeowners receive. We all know that our renters are still facing longstanding issues of affordability, black mold, crime, vermin, and more. That's flat out wrong. This is Montgomery County, after all. We can do so much better, so let's make that happen together.
Thank you, Mr. Hucker. And Mr. Riemer.
Thank you so much. Really glad to be here this evening. Thank you for holding this forum. I'm running for county executive because this county needs to be moving forward. And in a number of critical areas, we're not. I'm running because real change means saying yes to bold, innovative policy solutions that make a real difference in people's day-to-day lives. I'm a parent with 2 kids in MCPS. Before I joined the council, I was Barack Obama's national youth director, and I ran a national campaign to stop the Republicans from privatizing Social Security. And I'm running for county executive because we want this county to be the best place to live and to raise a family. Well, that means access to great schools, to jobs, affordable housing it's great to live in, and a safe community. We aren't doing great on those measures, and we need to come out of COVID stronger. We're going to talk tonight about renter protections, and I think you know I've been there for you on eviction protection, tenant rights, COVID emergency rent stabilization, rental assistance. But we also have a bigger problem here. It's a growing housing shortage. Housing shortages lead to homelessness. It makes renting housing harder. It squeezes all of the affordable housing out of a community. We have to push back against that by supporting new housing. It's not the only answer for affordability, but it's fundamental. Our county executive has made new development a dirty word. Let's be part of a growing, thriving community together. I'm 100% powered by the people, take no funding from real estate companies or any companies, and I ask for your support to move this county forward.
Thank you, Mr. Riemer. And we'll now turn to our panel of reporters who may introduce themselves with their first question. And we'll start with Mr. Murillo.
Hi, I'm Mike Murillo with WTOP, and like the county executive, I'm also suffering from coronavirus. Use my voice as I continue on my road to recovery here with it. But I thank you for being here this evening and for having us here, WTOP, here this evening to take part in this. And you want me to jump right into the first question? All right, well, let's get right into affordable housing. According to the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, by 2045 in its forecast, the county will have 200,000 more residents than it did in 2015, obviously. So we're seeing this increasing wave of residents that we need to plan for, yet we still see an affordable housing shortage here in the county. So you all talked about the need to address that. I'd like to give you the floor to give some specifics on how you will address this issue.
And why don't we, I should have done this before, my apologies. We'll start in alphabetical order and then we'll switch it up as we go along. So start it in the order that we did introductions. Thanks. So Mr. Blair.
Thank you. Thank you for the question, Mike. So clearly it's a fundamental right that anyone that works in this county should be able to afford to live here. And by any metric, we're lacking affordable housing. You're probably familiar with the Thrive Plan. There's many things about that I particularly like, including their focus on affordable housing and the idea of the 15-minute community. In other words, how we should strive to make more of our housing walkable and accessible to quality transit, community gathering places, shopping, jobs, et cetera. But as you noted, we've got a steep hill to climb. Our planning department, I think by 2030 estimates that we needed 31,000 new units. And over the past decade, we've been averaging something like 2,600. In fact, last year, we just added, I think, about 1,500 new units. But regardless, we're falling woefully short of the new housing that we need. So clearly, we must aggressively pursue mixed income, mixed use developments, county investments in affordable housing products, such as maximizing housing construction where transit and transportation infrastructure exists. So examples would be like White Flint, Shady Grove, Forest Glen, and our future Purple Line stations. But that's not enough, right? We're not going to be able to build the amount of new housing we need if we don't grow the number of good paying jobs. Let me give you a specific example. Last year, planners talked to developers at White Flint, and that's often seen or talked about as one of the greatest opportunities and prospects for transit-oriented smart development. The zoning has been in place. They're ready to go. And when we asked them why they're not building, the answer was simple. The county's poor record on job growth. The people who build housing recognize that people want to live near their jobs. Most job growth in the region has occurred in DC and Northern Virginia, where developers are concentrating these new projects. So that's a significant factor why we have thousands of units that could be built under existing zoning that aren't happening. Right? Now, we're not here today to talk about economic development, but over the past decade, I've spoken to hundreds of community and business leaders and developers.
Sorry, our time just ran out. Apologies.
No worries. I apologize, Robert.
I know there's more. I know 2 minutes is hard, but promise we'll get some more time in there. Mr. Elrich, you're on mute.
Two minutes is really hard, but I will say this. Look, Montgomery County's housing shortage and projected shortage. The first thing you need to know is the county's zoned for all the development that would accommodate all of this growth already. All of the future job projections are based on growth projections based on existing zoning. Our problem is not zoning. And David's dead right about White Flint. I read the same report and reached the same conclusion. The developer said, we're not building because we can't get enough rent. Not because we can't build, not because we can't pull permits. There are over 40,000 units that all a developer has to do today is pull a permit and they can build it. So the lack of housing has nothing to do with the inability to build it. It has to do with, as David said, I agree with, it's the incomes of the people here do not match the expectations of the developers in White Flint. It is not helped, though, when everything you zone for is high rise, which guarantees the highest price per square foot in construction, which makes it incredibly difficult. Even I would agree with the developer when they tell us how hard it is to build affordable housing in a building that costs $500 a square foot to build. It doesn't work. It doesn't work very well. So we need strategies that look at who's coming here. The other thing, which nobody wants to talk about, everybody talks about the projection of 40,000 people coming here. Those 40,000 people actually had incomes attached to them. Almost 3/4 of those people would require subsidized housing. In Montgomery County, for every 100 market units you build, I get 15% affordable housing. If all I'm going to get is 1/4 of that, say 10,000 units that can pay market, then somehow the 10,000 units have to yield 30,000 units of affordable housing below market. That is very difficult. We are looking at ways of changing that. I'm about to announce, and our staff is putting this together, we're inviting all of the developers who are for-profit and nonprofit to a show where we're going to put on the table every county property, every parking lot, every garage, and every vacant lot we have, and say, make us proposals on building affordable housing here.
Thank
You were trying to tell me to stop.
I appreciate it. I know 2 minutes is tough, and you have the option for a minute rebuttal time, so don't forget that. Mr. Hucker.
Thanks, Will. As Mike said, Montgomery County unanimously declared a housing crisis not that long ago, but we act like we have a minor housing concern, not a crisis. Rents and home sales continue to increase, which pushes stable rental housing and the American dream of home ownership out of reach for way too many residents. So as county executive, I'll do everything I can to achieve our housing goals. I serve on the board of the Greater Washington Council of Governments. I voted for the spending for that report and then adopted the report and for the goals, and Councilmember Navarro and I brought them to the council where they were adopted unanimously. we made a commitment to all 24 governments in our region to declare that crisis and to set our goals. And we agreed to build 4,100 units of housing each year for 10 years in Montgomery County. Last year, we only created 1,200, not 4,100. We reached 29% of our goals. And we heard from the county executive minutes ago, a very fringe position. He's spoken out against the goals. And according to the Washington Post, he's the only major elected official in the region that opposes them. They ran a headline that right under the headline said, an unprecedented push to address the region's affordable housing crisis hit its first major snag, a stubborn, independent-minded county executive responsible for implementing policy in the area's second largest jurisdiction. And that stubbornness impacts the quality of life for our tenants. Just in my district, there are several projects the community is desperate to redevelop, and we've missed opportunities to do that in Silver Spring, White Oak, and Burtonsville just in the last few years. We have to make affordable housing a pressing priority. The leadership has to come from the executive branch. Under my presidency, the Affordable Housing Group, Rebuilding Together, gave the council an award for our innovative policy and unprecedented funding for affordable housing. And obviously, Hans deserves credit for that as well. But we did it without help from the current administration. I'll bring the urgency on this topic we need to the county executive's office. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hucker. Maybe we'll find a way to get you those 8 seconds back, but thank you. Mr. Riemer.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Hucker was right there about the history. There was a really important regional effort that came together, regional leaders from all over working through our regional planning organization to create a big vision for how this whole region could be more affordable. Fundamentally, it's about ensuring that our kids have a chance to live here and that they can find an affordable place and a good job. And one leader in this region fought against that plan to increase our housing supply, to avoid a California-style housing shortage. And that was County Executive Elrich. And we've heard from him tonight comments reinforcing those views, like the zoning is already there. That is the justification that he has used time and time again to oppose master plans in transit areas, to oppose housing, to retain housing moratoriums in transit areas. So what have I done to tackle this issue? A lot. As chair of the Housing Committee, I led the legislation to allow people to build basement apartments and backyard cottages. I helped remove the housing moratorium, which was affecting our Red Line corridor and places all over the county, holding back development and housing near Metro. I helped steer master plans, Veers Mill, Forest Glen, Montgomery Hills, Mark Station areas, Germantown, Ashton Village, Shady Grove, through the council process. I've crafted Thrive, a marvelous vision for the future of this county that's waiting for council action. County executive resisted or has called for stopping work on many of those plans and on Thrive. I created a $50 million social housing fund, a very innovative model to blend affordable housing and market rate housing based on the example from Vienna about how you can create and sustain affordable housing over time by mixing in market rate rents with guaranteed affordable units. We've created a $50 million fund that we expect will create nearly 1,000 units of housing a year. So as county executive, I'll build on these efforts and do more.
Thank you so much, Mr. Riemer. Now, I take it one or a few of you might want your minute for rebuttal time. And so I didn't know if that was a hand up, Mr. County Executive, or if you were.
Yeah.
Okay. Feel free, and I have the time here.
I don't know what Tom is talking about, but in White Oak, for example, White Oak, we moved the project forward at the White Oak Gateway. I solved the problem in Town Center. We're moving forward with the project in Burtonsville, assuming they come back with a lease for the grocer they've been looking for. So I've done everything I can, particularly getting personally involved to make sure those projects move forward and they didn't stay dead. As far as moratoriums go, you should tell people about why the moratoriums are there. They're there because we have inadequate transportation, we have overcrowded schools, and the council will not put in place the adequate fees to assure that when you do new development, you actually provide the schools and transportation you need. There was a reason for it, and the purpose of the moratorium was basically to force council action to provide the necessary infrastructure. What you've done is bypass the requirement to provide the community with infrastructure and leave us with potentially development that's not going to be supportable. We already see it in our overcrowded schools. Our school budget is not adequate to fund what the schools are requesting.
Thank you, Mr. Elrich.
I should have gotten a minute for each of them.
I understand that the minute is even tougher than the 2 minutes. Would anyone else like rebuttal or response on this question? That's the Mr. Riemer and then Mr. Hucker.
Thank you. The moratorium is the shining example of the kind of policy that has been dragging this county down for decades. It is the reason that business investment does not want to come into this county. And it is holding back progress and change in places like, or it was, in Grosvenor, White Flint, all up and down Rockville Pike. Well, those are if you want this area to change for the better, you've got to turn some of these suburban strip centers into bustling, vibrant places. Like that's essential for our economic vision of being a place that empty nesters and young families, young workers want to live. So we've got to think a little bit differently. What the council has done is right-size the housing tax, the new housing tax, which is the development impact tax, so that it actually matches the impact on the schools, and to right-size the charges on transportation. And we're getting revenue as a result, and we're funding our commitments. So it's, nothing is easy, but if you want change, you've got to really embrace the future.
Thank you, Mr. Riemer. Mr. Hucker.
I just want to catch Mark up a little. I think he's drawing on data from the 1980s and the 1990s. If you read the reports from our bipartisan experts at the planning board and the planning staff, they have made very clear families have changed. This is not a surprise to any of us. I grew up next to a family with 8 kids, another family with 5 on the other side. We don't see a whole lot of that anymore. The families that are moving to the county today, many of them are single adults, many don't have kids in the schools, and many don't use the roads as much as they did in the 80s and 90s. The reason we don't have enough money for our infrastructure is because we have a stagnant economy. We were last in the region in job growth, the only one losing jobs pre-COVID in this administration. And we need to juice our economy to bring back the dollars we need to build the infrastructure that the county needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hucker. Mr. Blair, did you need a rebuttal? Okay. All right, we will move on to Mr. Schatz.
Thanks. Good evening, everybody. I'm Andrew Schatz. I'm managing editor of Bethesda Beats. We've seen a number of issues over the last several years in which the council and the executive do not agree on policy related to development. One of them was a bill in 2020 in which the council passed a measure that would give discounts to developers on impact taxes. And the thinking is that might stimulate development, while the counter argument was that it's a loss of revenue and it won't necessarily work. I'd like to hear what each of you think about your position on that. And that's it.
Which one are you talking about?
Sorry.
Are you talking about the Metro thing?
Yes.
Okay.
Here we'll go in reverse order. So we'll go Mr. Riemer, Hucker, Elrich, and then Blair.
Okay. Well, Mr. Schatz, good to see you. The language in your question was about impact taxes, which would seem like you were talking about the impact tax policy that the council wrote and adopted, that corrected a basically flawed model that was charging new housing more than the cost of new students, and that when the cost is too great, you don't get any housing. And the problem that county executive agreed with David Blair on at White Flint is that the cost of housing is greater than the anticipated rent. So you're not going to get any new housing unless you fix that problem. If it's the WMATA bill that you're referring to, very proud of that legislation that seeks to address the fact that every metro station in Montgomery County has a parking lot or a parking garage on top of it instead of housing. And if you want to fix that, you've got to provide funding to replace the parking garages or the parking lots and the parking spaces. And the county's never done that. So the properties just sit there vacant year after year. Best example is the White Flint Metro Station, which is a big field of vegetation where there should be development. If we want to fix that, we've got to partner with the private sector. And so the legislation provided a tax incentive for new development to come in. And guess what? A big project at Grosvenor is moving forward, and Amazon is going to fund it with an affordable housing program. So we're getting results from that project, that legislation, and we need to see that Forest Glen and Wheaton and Shady Grove and Glenmont and Silver Spring and Rockville and all the stations ultimately get the benefit.
Thank you, Mr. Riemer. Mr. Hucker.
Thanks. Andrew, did you decide whether you were talking about the moratorium or the WMATA bill?
Well, since you're bringing them, why don't you talk about both of them?
Okay, yeah, in 2 minutes. Sure. All right. On the moratorium, as I was saying earlier, our bipartisan planning board and our expert staff recommended an end to the moratorium because based on all the data they had, it was creating unintended consequences by driving away development where the community in places that the community really wanted it. And it was not serving the purpose that it was intended, and that's why the council overwhelmingly repealed it. And we made other adjustments to update our growth policy and infrastructure policy to reflect the needs of 2021 and not the needs of decades ago. On the transit-oriented, on the metro development bill, I thought that bill had a lot of merit. It envisioned, anything we can do to drive development at our metro stations is a good idea. I was a co-sponsor of the original transit-oriented development bill that Governor O'Malley sponsored when I was in the General Assembly. However, if you talk to developers, they'll say dealing with the bureaucracy at WMATA is often the biggest hurdle that they face. And I thought that the way the bill was amended made it overly broad. I thought some projects need our subsidies and others don't. And there's a lot of room for judgment. If Victory Housing or HOC or our other nonprofit developers want to develop a lot of new housing and retail near Metro, that's fantastic. And I've pushed Paul Wiedefeld, the general manager of WMATA, to allow that at Forest Glen and elsewhere. But if Jeff Bezos wanted to come in and build a lot of housing, that's a great thing, but I don't think he needs our subsidy. And I'd rather dedicate that to our nonprofit and other housing developers. So that's why I thought the bill needed to be a little more narrowed, but it was a great one in concept. We really need to double down on our efforts to build over WMATA stations. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Hucker. Mr. Elrich.
So the bill is a 15-year tax giveaway. And the effect of it has been to reduce the projected revenues that will go to build schools. And Mr. Riemer and the other council members said last year when they did it, that they would pass a piece of legislation to replace the revenues they gave away so the county would have the money to build the schools. Well, Hans never got around to putting in the bill to replace the revenue. The council president never put in the bill to replace the revenue. I suppose they would like me to put it in and they say, there goes the county executive raising taxes again, but this is your puppy. So you guys need to put in the bill you said you were going to put in. That would help. We should not be in a position of not needing schools. And if we didn't need the schools, then we wouldn't be worried about this. We need the schools and we need the revenues. Part of this problem is people paying too much for a piece of property. It continues to frustrate me that people buy property knowing that they've got MPDU requirements and then say the numbers don't work. If the numbers don't work, you should offer a price for a piece of property that reflects the value you can extract from the property, not a use that is only theoretical, but you can't get when it happens in the real world. So for a developer to pay too much and then turn to us and say, well, you got to give me a break here. I can't make the numbers work. That's normally the question that most of us would ask when we were sitting down at the table with somebody and negotiating the price of what I was about to buy. I would not buy something where I couldn't make the numbers work. And that was very frustrating. And I'll point out, I actually voted for that project. I thought Grosvenor was the one place that made sense. We were told the density we were giving them would solve the problem of being able to build there. And then no sooner was the ink dry on what we did, and they came back and they said they wanted more money. The school overcrowding continues to be an issue. So regardless of what people think about what the new thinking is from our bipartisan planning board, the problem is still there, hasn't gone away. And I got to remind people that these single people coming into the county, and this is who's here, they actually will grow up. They will, like the rest of us, probably get married and have children, and they'll put pressure on the schools. So you got to look at the complete picture.
Appreciate you. Mr. Blair next, and then I see your hand up for rebuttals, Mr. Hucker.
Well, thank you for the thoughtful question, and I enjoy the healthy debate. Let me describe it from my perspective. I have a saying: don't confuse activity with progress. And clearly, there's been significant activity to increase affordable housing, including the Metro Development Bill that you described. But that's not it. That's not just it, right? I mean, off the top of my head, I can think of all of the master plans that we've passed, that we rewrote our zoning codes. We've increased the percentage of MPDUs in many parts of the county. We provided tax benefits. We loosened restrictions on the accessory dwelling units. And yet, right, despite all of those things, we're building fewer units today than we did a decade ago, right? So don't confuse activity with progress. There's, I mean, a tremendous amount of work went into these bills, which make much sense. The missing ingredient here is jobs, right? And we've heard it in a couple different responses, right? You know, we've heard this time and time again from developers. And as I said before, while we're not here to talk about economic development, you know, over the past decade, as I've spent time meeting with business leaders and community leaders, we've put forth a plan so that we can actually start creating jobs here, right? So that developers want to build in these areas, right? I released that plan last year and essentially leverages the assets that we already have in Montgomery County to create good paying jobs, because that's an essential element to creating affordable housing. I think it's, you know, I don't think anybody would argue that with the talent we have here in Montgomery County, the access to capital and strategic assets, we should be leading the region in new business growth, not lagging.
Thank you so much, Mr. Blair. So for 1 minute rebuttals, saw Mr. Hucker's hand first, and then Mr. Riemer, Mr. Elrich after that.
Thanks, Will. Look, obviously, school overcrowding has been a problem for quite a while, and it's a very small percentage of our school funding that comes from developer fees. Reassure Mark, as he knows, it's only lost revenue if the project would get built without the fee. The problem was no projects have been getting built in Montgomery County for several years, and our planning staff showed us that our developer fees were higher than almost anywhere in the region. I agree that school overcrowding is a problem. That's why I was so concerned. It's surprising to hear that from the county executive, because he sent us a capital budget where he delayed the construction of Woodward High School, the premier high school in Bethesda, the new one we're putting in. He delayed the construction of Northwood High School, which was dependent on Woodward, so we could put the kids currently at Northwood into the new Woodward. He delayed the middle schools that were dependent on those projects, and he delayed the Purple Line Tunnel for 2 years as well. Which triggered a letter from the MDOT secretary telling him to apply for free state and regional money that he didn't even reply to. So school overcrowding is a problem. That's why we need creative solutions. We don't need more delay in the capital budget sent over to the council.
Thank you, Mr. Hucker. Mr. Riemer.
I think this race is about whether we want to be a growing, thriving community with a great future, or whether we want to have leadership that puts up roadblocks and gets in the way of progress and change. And I think what we're hearing is a lot of justifications for roadblocks and obstruction. You know, yes, there are tough choices that we have to make in order to be ahead of the curve, to move forward. But that's what leadership is supposed to do, is figure out how to get there. And we are lacking in the job growth, and we are lacking in the housing growth, and they go together. We're lacking in the investment. We're lacking in the dynamism and the vitality. We've got to turn this around, and that's what this race is about. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Riemer. Mr. Elrich.
This is one of those moments where I wish we were talking about economic development, but I have the most aggressive economic development plan, and working with the university system and working with the development community would make a significant difference in what Montgomery County looks like going forward. I'll also say that I've been proposing, and we're going to send it over to the council, a discussion about getting rid of the impact taxes and replacing with development district taxes, which do not fall on residents. And Hans raises his hands, but this is what Virginia does. You know, and sometimes when people are eating your lunch and you wonder why they're eating your lunch, you ought to look at why they're eating your lunch. They can guarantee projects and they can finance projects with bonds that we can't do. And our lack of infrastructure is a serious, serious problem. So there are ways to deal with this. We do need to deal with the economy, though. I agree. The White Flint developers were absolutely straightforward when they said they cannot build in this housing market because they cannot get the rents they want. That's reality. And whatever the smart people in park and planning think, they wrote that report and then don't listen to what they're being told.
Thank you, Mr. Elrich. Mr. Blair, I didn't see if you put your hand up for a rebuttal or not. No? Cool. All right, we will move to Ms. Tant for her question. And just a reminder, 2-minute responses to questions here, and then we'll move to the 1-minute rebuttal round. So Ms. Tant, we'll go to you.
Thank you, and thank you to the Renters Alliance for having me. Montgomery County is pretty inequitable when it comes to affordable housing, especially when you look at how the eastern part of the county compares to the western part of the county. My question is whether you think this is a problem, why or why not? And if you do think that it's a problem, what are you going to do specifically to bridge these disparities?
And ordering here, we'll start with Mr. Elrich, Mr. Hucker, Mr. Riemer, and then Mr. Blair.
So a couple of things. I mean, the first beginning of the BRT system, Montgomery County, is on the east side of the county. And, some of the transportation people said, why are you doing that? And I said, because these people are stuck in the worst traffic and have the least infrastructure. And we need to provide infrastructure, because if there's ever going to be development there needs to be more infrastructure than Route 29. So that was a priority for me. I also started out and I said, I want to get an east side campus of Montgomery College over there. So people in that community feel that they're being treated the same as everybody else. And Montgomery College is going forward, and there'll be money in this budget for the beginning of an East County Montgomery College campus. This is something that I prioritized. When I came in and I saw that there were projects stuck on the drawing boards over there, there was a problem at the White Oak Gateway on New Hampshire Avenue, and there was a problem with the town center development. I got myself involved in those projects enough to make sure they got moving and they could get through park and planning. And that meant having to resolve differences of opinion between our people and park and planning people and, permitting. This is one of the unfortunate things about the way our system is structured. Nobody else in this country and nobody else in this state goes through the process that a developer has to go through in Montgomery County. It is the worst process, and it is expensive, and it makes it longer. But we're trying to make this a simpler process for people. We're continuing to work with folks who are interested in developing on the east side of the county, and we need to continue to be willing to make those investments. I do think that a college over there, amplifying the BRT, this stage of the study for the BRT in 29 is going to take it from mixed traffic below New Hampshire Avenue to a more separated route all the way into downtown Silver Springs, so it functions like true BRT. That was one of the first things I felt I had to deal with, because you just can't have the east side of the county be devoid of all these different services.
Thank you so much.
Sorry, if I can just, if I have a follow-up question for you to address during your rebuttal time, but can you say whether you would incentivize affordable housing in the west side of the county, Mr. County Executive, later when you have time? Sorry to interrupt.
We do.
No, of course. Let's take a pin in that. Mr. Hucker, your 2 minutes.
Sure. Thanks, Will. Yes, Rebecca, it's absolutely a problem. You and I have talked a lot about East County. As you know, I've been representing it for 7 years on the council, and I love it greatly. And we are very vigorously trying to address many legacy problems that have been put in place there that demonstrate inequities in our transportation, in our housing, in our job growth, in our education system, and many other things. And the progress is far too slow. It's very frustrating, but we've made some good progress. Marc's right to be excited about the passage through the Board of Trustees, the Montgomery College campus idea for East County. A number of us have been pushing for that very strongly as well. The bus rapid transit that Marc stood up, and we were both there when it was kicked off on Route 29. That's terrific. I'm very glad it's entirely in my district. However, we were promised a real bus rapid transit in a dedicated lane that was on a shoulder down to Tech Road and then a mixed traffic. We never got the bus rapid transit on the shoulder, and the county executive sent the transportation committee that I chair a proposal to keep it in mixed traffic for the foreseeable future. And it was our committee and the council that changed it back to add funding and to create a dedicated lane. So we actually will finally have the bus rapid transit that we promised. And finally, in the Viva White Oak development, it is funny to hear this. It's a little surreal because the county executive was recently quoted in the Washington Business Journal, basically trashing the project, saying it was a bad investment, even though the county's it's one of our premier economic development projects, and saying that if he was a venture capitalist and he had money to invest, he'd invest it on the west side of the county, where the rich folks are, in White Flint or in Shady Grove. That was inappropriate, and that's why so many council members signed a letter to the residents of East County telling them, don't worry, we're very, very committed to East County. Thank you.
You, Mr. Hucker. Mr. Riemer, your 2 minutes.
Thank you. I think the first important thing to understand is that the circumstances of the East County today are the sad but intentional result of the same anti-development mindset that our county executive has embraced for decades. The development in the East County was shut down intentionally. That was the policy of this county, not to grow and change in the East County. And they thought that by doing that, it would remain the way it was forever. That's not what has happened. What has happened is the community has lacked access to jobs. The lacking access to jobs has reduced the quality of life, and it's not as great of a place to live as it could be. So we have to redevelop and create change and progress for the East County. And a big part of that, of course, is leveraging the FDA and developing job centers in the East County. Cheerleading for the East County, as Councilmember Hucker said, the county executive talking down the prospects of the East County when he should be cheerleading it as the leader for the East County. And of course, to the question, Ms. Tan, thank you. We need affordable housing on the west side of Montgomery County. We have to stand up and fight for access to the opportunities of the schools and of the neighborhoods and of the communities in every part of this county. That is why I introduced and the council supported legislation that raises the amount of affordable housing on new development in affluent neighborhoods in Montgomery County, legislation that I passed in 2018. That is why I fought for the master plans such as Bethesda, the downtown Bethesda master plan that provides hundreds, maybe thousands of housing units that the county executive voted against as a council member. You've got to support new development on the west side to bring more affordable housing. That's the only way it's going to happen. I've been fighting for the east side and for affordable housing on the west side.
Thank you, Mr. Riemer. Mr. Blair, your 2 minutes.
Thank you, Becca. So clearly I'm concerned about the east side of the county. BRT was an important and good first step, and I agree with Councilman Hucker about the dedicated lane. Clearly, Viva White Oak is a priority for us. But more broadly speaking, we need affordable housing in both the East County and West County. I think a great example was the Lindley at Chevy Chase Lake Purple Line Station, where HOC partnered with the developer in a project that resulted in a net increase in number of income restricted affordable units. So that's a net increase. And so that's a big deal. And that would be great both on the east side of the county and the west side of the county. And it's a type of initiative that we should clearly pursue, because these families now have moved from antiquated, energy inefficient units to new apartments. And we now have quality affordable housing in a great location. And we should make that happen all along the Purple Line and in many other places in our county where we have aging garden style apartments that are in need of investments to stay properly maintained. And that is really truly a win-win type of approach. But I also want to comment on what Councilmember Riemer. We need jobs, right? And for the past decade, we've been graduating thousands of young men and women from Montgomery County public schools that are neither college ready nor career ready. So it's no wonder that they're struggling to find a job and to pay rents. Our graduating seniors deserve so much better than this endless string of minimum wage jobs. And the jobs are here. We're just not properly training our workforce. And I was thrilled that Margaret was on the call at Montgomery College, because they're doing amazing things. I was hosted by their auto tech unit recently. It's amazing, but there's only 40 young men and women in the program in a county where we have 1 million residents and over 2 million cars that are going to need service.
Thank you, Mr. Blair. All right, I see Mr. Riemer's hand up for a rebuttal, for a 1 minute rebuttal, then Mr. Elrich. So Mr. Riemer with your 1 minute, then Mr. Elrich.
Well, thanks. I just wanted to, maybe take the moment to frame some of the differences between Mr. Blair and myself. He mentioned the Lindley. The Lindley is there today because I fought for it. We zoned that neighborhood for more development there, despite very difficult challenges in the community and over the vote of Marc Elrich as a council member. We allowed that project to move forward. It is a model, it's an amazing model, and it is the philosophical inspiration for the $50 million housing fund that I work with my colleagues at the council to create this year. So if that's a great example of what leadership can do in this county, please understand that I had a big role in that, and it's a vision that I have for the future. Every metro station, every Purple Line station can bring that kind of blended, mixed use, affordable, and market development throughout the county.
Thank you, Mr. Riemer. Mr. Elrich, you just went off camera for us.
Did I?
Yes, you did.
Am I off camera?
There you go.
Go back on camera.
Yep.
Okay. A couple of things to say. One is Bethesda is becoming basically a gated, segregated community. Almost all the units being built are one bedroom. I don't know if you've looked at the price of those units online lately, but I was looking at them today, and they're far above the existing units, many of which are going to be displaced by the rezoning that the council voted for. Most of them being one bedroom, there are no families going over there. So we're effectively preventing families from moving into the west side of the county. And since most of it's not affordable, it's exacerbated by the condo fees. And so we have multiple projects asking us to give them the exemption, allow them to move those units out of those buildings and put them someplace else because the tenants can't afford the condos fees. So we'll be sending you legislation that will require that the price of a unit in a condo include the condo fees and be affordable with the condo fees rather than displacing people from those buildings. But that's the work of what you guys have done. You're creating a very segregated community on the west side of the county, and it is not a good thing. There should have been places for lower zoning and more affordable zoning.
Mr. Hucker, Mr. Blair, any rebuttals? No. Mr. Riemer, I think did we start? You already had a rebuttal, I think.
Yep.
One rebuttal per round. I apologize. Sorry. Have to hold it there. All right. So we'll go back for another round of reporter questions. We'll go in reverse order, actually. So start with Ms. Tan this time.
Great. I get to go again. The county currently has a rent stabilization program in place that's set to expire in May 2022. Can you say whether you support a permanent program of rent stabilization across the county? Why not? And more broadly, can you speak to what is your plan for the quote unquote gradual eviction crisis that advocates say is going to play out in the county and elsewhere over the course of this year?
Okay, and for this, which is a 2-minute round, we will start with, we'll go Mr. Hucker, Riemer, Blair, and then Elrich. So Mr. Hucker, you're up for 2 minutes.
Thanks, Will. Big question, Rebecca. In terms of rent stabilization, yes, we have put that in place during the pandemic and these extreme circumstances, and I voted for it both times. People should realize, have rent stabilization built into our housing policy in Montgomery County through our MPDU program and through our very vigorous investments in HOC and our nonprofit housing developers. Our MPDU program has been a national model because it doesn't segregate poverty in just some buildings. It distributes affordable housing around the county. Does it need to be improved and updated? Yeah, I believe it does. But it's been a model for other jurisdictions, and we need to improve it and continue to make it more accessible and to include truly affordable units by lowering the floor, updating the range, making other creative changes like that, and working with our affordable housing providers to meet the needs of the market. I also believe in rent stabilization in targeted areas like along the Purple Line, where a big public investment by the state potentially is going to drive up rents for both residential and commercial properties. So I've been staying in close touch with the leaders of the Purple Line Compact to ensure that the Purple Line doesn't lead to unwise gentrification there. I've been fighting for the Purple Line for a very long time, and none of us want to see anyone who has been there surviving, paying taxes on that underserved corridor being pushed out by increasing rents along there. And I support other things like a right to counsel and a robust policy agenda that go along with rent stabilization to keep people out of court. The eviction crisis that we've had in Montgomery County and the region is really a missed opportunity, I think. I've called on the administration for a year to set up a STEP program, strategic targeted eviction prevention program like Baltimore County has, to take the burden off tenants and put it on landlords to remove entire lists of tenants from threat of eviction and get the landlord to pay a partial payment, to accept a partial payment so they can stretch the funding much longer. What this administration's been doing, siphoning 15% of our federal dollars off for administration of DHTA and wasting money that we could be applying to keep people in their homes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I suspect we'll all need the 1 minute rebuttal time here. It's a big question, but I appreciate that. Mr. Riemer, you're up next for your 2 minutes.
Thanks. Well, I'd just like to start by flagging, I strongly disagree with the county executive's comment that new development in Bethesda is causing it to become a segregated community. I mean, have you been to Bethesda? Mm-hmm. We have a significant racial disparity in where people live in this county, known as segregation. It's not legal, of course, but that is the reality of this county. And, it long predates changes. And in fact, the changes that we're trying to make are specifically intended to open up access and to allow new housing types that are more affordable, to allow more people to live on the west side of the county. And it takes development often to make that happen. So, that I really strongly disagree that the housing policies we're advancing are doing anything other than opening up access and reducing the historic legacy of segregation. As for the eviction crisis, I'm proud of the work that we've done at the county council to support tenants. Evictions today are lower than they were before the COVID crisis. And we need to maintain the protections as long as we are in a crisis. I voted to extend the council's SMART framework around the rental increase moratorium because of the crisis. So we need to be responsive to the facts on the ground. I have been a strong advocate for tenant legal assistance, and I will continue to do that. Support for grassroots organizations that work with tenants so they know their rights. We have to empower tenants to stand up for themselves and to protect them in court. And ultimately, I agree with Tom's characterization of the MPDU program. I'm a strong believer that a share of our housing market should be under price protection, but I would achieve that through nonprofit development rather than rent control.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Riemer. Mr. Blair, your 2 minutes.
Thank you. So housing is everyone deserves to have housing. They deserve to be able to afford in the county that they work. With that being said, I don't believe that long-term broad rent control will solve our affordable housing problem. Though I do very much support rent control during the crisis, and clearly we're still in one. I also support tenants against unfair and wrongful evictions, and there are immediate changes we must continue to pursue. Let's follow what Virginia's doing and provide more notification time before an eviction. Clearly, tenants deserve a right to counsel, as we've heard, at eviction hearings. I'm pleased that our legislators passed that last session, and now as a county, let's hold the state to its commitment to fully fund it. Raising eviction fees is clearly effective. It's both potentially a way to help fund right to counsel, and it's a method to prevent that horrible practice of landlords mass filing evictions. I'd evaluate the Office of Landlord-Tenant Affairs and determine if are there more effective ways through their process to hold landlords accountable for maintaining quality living conditions. And also, let's make sure that the renters all know their rights. But as I said, I don't believe rent stabilization will address the root cause. And in fact, there's research that suggests that long-term rent control dampens the creation of new housing units, as well as increase the number of rental units that are being converted to condominiums. So for example, in Tacoma Park, I believe rent control has been there for many, many years. And in the city, they've seen a decrease of 18% of rental units since 2000. I think the key, going back to what I said earlier, the key is building more affordable units, particularly maximizing housing construction where transit and transportation infrastructure exists, such as White Flint, Shady Grove, Forest Glen, and future Purple Line stations.
Thank you, Mr. Blair. And Mr. Elrich, your 2 minutes.
So a couple of things. One is that, the new housing being planned, Park and Planning evaluated East Silver Spring and looked at what would happen if they built this missing middle housing, and their conclusion was the new units would actually be more expensive than the existing units. So it's really hard to see how this is going to solve an affordability problem. And I think skating around Bethesda is really interesting because the plan to let neighborhoods reshape themselves is totally voluntary. It could happen quickly, it could happen not at all. We have no control over that. The zoning that you put on top of property that is going to get torn down and massively redeveloped, when 2- and 3-story buildings go to be 20-story buildings, and you create all that wealth and all that new property, that's a place where you have control. That is the one thing where we absolutely have the ability to guarantee that we can control the price of housing. And that's a place where we don't do it. We take the few MPDUs we get, and that's the end of the day. And then we create a system where they can get out of the MPDUs. So yeah, Bethesda, because of income, is more segregated than other parts of the county. Not all the county with single family zoning, though, is segregated. So it's specific to the incomes and the prices of housing in particular areas. Nonprofit development is not going to solve your problem. As I tried to point out, if I built 10,000 affordable units and got 1,500 MPDUs, that doesn't even take care of the new people who are coming here, let alone the people at 32% of AMI, 20,000 of them who are spending 60% of their income, or the people between 30 and 50% of AMI, another 24,000 people who can't find affordable housing, or the 30,000 or 27,000 that are coming here in the next 10 years for whom no affordable housing will be built in quantity. So relying on the nonprofits to do this the way it is right now is not going to happen. I'm hoping, frankly, that I get interest from the nonprofit community in building on the county's assets, which are our parking lots.
Thank you, Mr.
So we can
Elrich.
actually control that differently.
Thank you very much. Anyone like 1 minute?
Sorry, Will, could I just jump in to ask a quick follow-up of the county executive that I hope you can address during his follow-up time? I'm just wondering if he could say directly whether he supports a countywide rent control law or not.
Oh, ran out of time. Yeah, I would support a countywide rent control law, but I would be specific about a couple of things. One, I would put a cutoff date for properties older than a certain date. District has a similar law. I wouldn't put it on new construction because we're going to have at least MPDU requirements at the very least, and hopefully stricter MPDU requirements to assure more affordable housing in the future. I would craft the law so it allowed landlords to get increases above the rent guidelines in cases where their expenses exceeded what the rent guidelines would allow. The city of Tacoma Park did that. It made the law work a lot better. It removed some of the objections that landlords had that they couldn't make money in the buildings. We have a requirement, we can't take away a person's ability to be profitable. So I would maintain a lot of the features that the city law has. I would not do vacancy decontrol because that just causes trouble where people rent their units to somebody else at a higher price than rent control, but it never gets on the market. See, it's like New York City, which is not a good model for it. So I think we could build a sensible, workable program that focused on the housing that's most at risk of being lost, and today constitutes the basis of our affordable units.
Thanks so much. Mr. Riemer, good for a minute.
Thanks. Well, I have a different vision. Let's talk about the Purple Line Corridor. It's really important. The Purple Line Corridor Coalition has come together and said, working with community groups from renters and low-income communities and Hispanic communities, organizations, have said, in order to preserve the long-term affordability of the Purple Line corridor when the train comes in and there'll begin to be pressure. In order to have a balance of housing types and affordability levels, we should put about another 6,500 units of housing under control, meaning under nonprofit ownership or under some kind of price restriction. Since then, new development has and some redevelopment has produced about 1,500 units. So we're now at about 5,000 units of housing that have to be claimed or controlled by some kind of mission-driven ownership. We can do that. We can do this. We can finance affordable housing projects in the Purple Line corridor, help nonprofits buy buildings, redevelop them over time, and meet the affordability goals while allowing the market to thrive and grow and change. These two goals don't have to be at each other at odds.
Thank you. Anyone else for follow-on rebuttal? Seeing none. All right, we will go to Mr. Schatz.
Okay, thanks. I'd like to bring the discussion back to Thrive. Mr. Blair talked a little bit about it, but if I was hoping maybe you could each dig into it a little bit more at its most fundamental level. It's talking about ideas of compactness and diversity of use and walkability. Do you support the way the plan is drawn up right now? What specifically do you like about it? What specifically do you think it does not do well? And also talk a little bit about how the county has conveyed these principles, because there's still a lot of people who are very scared about what Thrive does, that it's going to be harmful and lead to immediate changes in zoning.
All right, and for this one, the ordering is back to our original ordering. So Mr. Blair, Mr. Elrich, Hucker, and then Riemer, and it's 2 minutes each. So Mr. Blair, you're on.
Sure. So as I alluded to earlier, there's a lot of things that I really like in the Thrive plan about creating affordable housing in the 15-minute community. I think those are phenomenal. And I also know that we have many homes that we need to be built. I think if there's one issue about the Thrive plan that causes the most friction is the allowing for the duplexes, the triplexes within a mile radius of the metros. And as I've been out there meeting with residents, there's a lot of concern about that. And are these units going to be compatible? But at the end of the day, it's not going to, it won't move the needle, right? Like we've got 31,000 units to build. We need to be building thousands of units around through the Purple Line corridor, some of the metro sites that I mentioned earlier, not just, converting single family homes into duplexes. I don't think that's going to get us there. So that would be my one concern about it. But let's go back to kind of what I think is the fundamental issues, and that is the jobs that we need to create to fill these affordable housing units, because the developers won't build them regardless. The government officials, we can put forth whatever tax incentives we want. We can put all kinds of zoning in, but that doesn't force the developer to build. The developers will be compelled to build when there's demand, and there'll be demand when there's jobs. And when I was CEO of a company here in Rockville, it was critical to me that every one of our employees was receiving an attractive wage and benefits, and they could live near their home, right? So they had a quality of life. And while we had thousands of employees all across the country, and we had employees in 30 different offices, the biggest challenge was right here in Rockville, Maryland, specifically off of King Farm Boulevard, where our call center employees, they couldn't afford to live here. So what did we do? Well, first we paid for everyone to become a certified pharmacy tech. Then we paid for their college education so that they could become clinicians. And over a 10-year period, we transformed that Rockville office into a center of excellence for our clinical account management services. So we were thinking
so much
because we knew we had to get higher.
Mr. Blair,
here in Montgomery County. So
much appreciated, but we gotta. Yeah,
sorry.
No worries. Sorry, I hate to stop y'all when you're rolling. Mr. Elrich.
So Thrive is interesting. I mean, the first thing I'll say is I think people's worst fears that the value of property in their neighborhoods is going to go down, I think is probably wrong. I think the most likely outcome is the property in their neighborhoods is going to go up, not down. You can see it in East Silver Spring, where There's an arts building, which I supported being built where the former police station was. And there's a string of townhouses facing the single family neighborhood. It's a single family neighborhood where housing's in the $700,000 to $800,000 range. And the townhouses that got built there are in the $900,000 range. Nothing affordable is going to come out of this. And that's not what developers are going to do. They'll look at the market and the neighborhood they're in. That's what they're going to build. My problem with Thrive is a bunch of things. One is we've planned in our master plans for the growth that's coming here. Those master plans, we used to call them smart growth. I mean, people used to be vaguely proud of them. And I may have disagreed about some densities, but I didn't disagree about the idea that these were places where development should happen. Now we're going to siphon that development because the people who are coming here are the people who are coming here. You're going to siphon that development out of the places you were trying to make compact, urbanesque, amenity-rich places that require a population to support the amenities, and you're going to scatter that population out away from it. If I build in downtown Wheaton, I do no harm to the environment. I could build all the units I want and probably not change impervious surface one iota. If I go to the neighborhoods 1 mile around the bus stop, then I'm going to do severe damage to the environment and severe damage to impervious surface. So environmentally, this isn't even a smart thing to do. It doesn't gain you anything because it doesn't gain you any new units. If I buy a lot there and I build 4 houses, I have no MPDU requirement. If I'm in Wheaton and I'm buying a lot and I have to build 20, 40, 60 houses on that, I have MPDU requirements. There's a lot of things that's smarter about the plans that we already put in place than Thrive. So I don't see Thrive as doing any enormous good. What it does, it gives a distraction from talking about real affordable housing. Because if you say I'm going to build affordable housing, you can say it all you want. If it's not going to happen, it's not going to happen.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Hucker, your 2 minutes.
Let's start at the beginning a little bit. I'm not sure even all the viewers know very much about Thrive at this point. Thrive's the updated general plan. We're required by law to have a general plan for Montgomery County. The last one was updated in 1993. Now, a lot has changed since 1993. So we're out of compliance with many things in our existing general plan. And 2 things that our existing general plan doesn't mention are racial equity and climate, because nobody was talking about those things in 1993 very much. And they're central to our land use decisions right now. So yes, we need to update the plan. We need to pass it with a vigorous public discussion, and that's been happening. Thrive doubles down on many things that people have been supporting for generations in Montgomery County, like smart growth, like broadening out our transportation choices and giving people more housing options. I represent Four Corners, for example, in Montgomery Hills. In those areas, which were built decades ago exclusively for people privileged enough to have a car, I have lots of constituents that drive 3 blocks to get a half a gallon of milk from the store. We shouldn't be forcing people into those limited choices. We've passed at the council level pedestrian master plan, a bicycle master plan that give people those options. Thrive builds on those and builds this concept of 15-minute communities, because all of us agree, as David was mentioning, all of us would like to have a job and a grocery store and a dry cleaner and a restaurant and a coffee shop that we could access within 15 minutes. That's not how our county was built. It takes a long time to retrofit it, but Thrive is a big step in the right direction. There will be lots more opportunities for public discussion. I've been meeting with lots of constituents about their concerns, and once they know what's in it, there's a lot more support usually than they feel at the very beginning of the meeting. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hucker. Excuse me. And Mr. Riemer, your 2 minutes.
Well, thank you. Thrive is really important. I mean, Thrive is the foundational vision for the future of our county from a housing and transportation perspective. And as Councilmember Hucker said, it identifies priorities like racial equity and climate change. It is an essential job for us to get done. And it's frustrating, but maybe not surprising, to hear both David Blair and Marc Elrich leaning against it. I know there is a lot of concern in affluent neighborhoods about any change in the neighborhood. I understand that. And the reality is Thrive won't bring change to your neighborhood. Any changes have to happen through totally different proposals that are not in front of the county council for discussion. there are lots of ways that we can, in a targeted and pragmatic way, allow for a little bit of a different kind of housing type along our transportation corridors, even duplexes in our neighborhoods. I think that there are ways that we can do that, but it's going to take leadership to make it happen. And I see a vibrant, dynamic future for our county, and I know that it takes leadership to get there. And if you can't lead on Thrive, what can you lead on? I mean, come on. So we have to work together and bring the community together to make this work. And I know that we can. I know we'll get it done. And there's really nothing more important for us to do. The fundamental vision of Thrive is that the corridors in the county should be where the growth happens. And by the way, the East County is one of those corridors. That's an essential part of Thrive, is correcting that historic mistake that left the East County out of development. So the county executive, David Blair, weakening public support for Thrive when it's exactly what we need to get this county moving. So we're going to get it done anyway.
Sorry, I was on mute. Thank you, Mr. Riemer. Mr. Blair, I see your hand up for a rebuttal, or were you?
Yes, yeah. So council member,
rebuttal. Yeah.
so I am in favor of Thrive. If there's one thing I'd be critical of, I would call it the duplexes around the metros. It's where I hear the most criticism. And the reality is it's not going to move the needle, right? So if you look over the past 10 years, on average, we've approved 26 duplexes per year. So we've added 26, right? And we're short 31,000 new units, right? So, and even when we think about like the accessory dwelling units, right? Phenomenal idea, a lot of activity, but the progress, we didn't see the results. In fact, in 3 years, I think we've seen those ADUs. We have essentially the same number of ADUs now today than we did in March of 2019 when you all worked so hard to get that passed. And so this goes back to where I said, let's not confuse activity with progress. So there's a lot, both of those areas, a lot of activity, a lot of work went into it, but there's no results, right? Versus when we were talking about like the Lindley project, like that was a great initiative. And there's other things that we can be doing along the Purple Line that can actually deliver affordable housing in mass and address this crisis that we find ourselves in.
Thank you, Mr. Blair. Other responses or rebuttals? Mr. Riemer, then Mr. Elrich.
Yeah, let's not confuse words for leadership. We need leaders who are willing to bring this county forward into the future. And I've never suggested that thinking differently about duplexes would solve the housing crisis. The reason you get a housing crisis is because everybody objects to the one solution. And then guess what? You don't have any solutions and you have a housing shortage. So we need all of the solutions. We need affordable housing financing. We need new housing. We need a more flexible way of getting housing like duplexes. We need accessory dwelling units. We need nonprofits building housing. We need everything. That's how you solve a crisis. So if you want a leader who's willing to confront the challenge like climate, like housing, like economic development, vote for a candidate who's actually leading. Thank you.
Mr. Riemer. Mr. Elrich, your 1 minute.
Yeah, quickly. First place, Route 29 is hardly a good category, particularly Upper 29, for a Thrive project because most of the neighborhoods don't front to that. And that's actually a better place for a major master plan redo and a redevelopment of those centers that go from Burtonsville down to White Oak in a more commercial fashion. You've got one of the heaviest traveled roads in Montgomery County that gets very, very little commercial frontage and very, very little significant use. And that in my mind was the big mistake in it. Historically was not trying to turn 29 into a parallel of what they tried to do on 355. But that's something I'm certainly interested in doing, is looking at how you re-envision Route 29 as a more commercial and livable place. But as far as Thrive goes, there was no reason to do this in the middle of a pandemic. It is actually inexcusable that you and the planning board thought at a time when people are terrified about being alive and didn't know what was going to happen the next day, that it was a good time to say, let's discuss how we rezone our neighborhoods, as if anybody was seriously paying attention to it. I don't know if you have any sense of how many people do not have a clue what Thrive means. They hear people like you talk about missing middle. They gave up on missing middle being affordable. It probably took them 2 months before they decided they weren't going to use that anymore.
Thank you. Any other rebuttals, Mr. Hucker? 1 minute there.
I won't use a full minute, Will, but I just want to build on what I said before, that if you just look at I think we all understand this, but if you look at the data, it supports it. Families aren't representative of the families that Montgomery County was really built for. I mean, it was largely built for a suburban community where everybody had a car. There were 2 parents and 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 kids, and everybody could afford a single family home. That world is gone. And many of our people moving to that, we still have plenty of those, but many people moving here, if you look at who's actually moving here, it's single adults. If you look at, there's an awful lot of single parents with 1 or 2 children, and there's an awful lot of seniors that want to downsize from the single family home that they had. Their kids are off in college or they've moved on, and they want to get something more affordable and in a 15-minute community closer to transit where they can walk to everything they need. And we haven't provided those options over the last 20 years for them. And that's one thing that Thrive does that I think there's going to be a lot of support for, because whether you're a young person that needs to get an apartment you can afford and save for a townhouse you can afford and move up to a single family home if you get married or want to start a family, or if you're a senior that wants to downsize, there's going to be more options if we update the general plan and create the right incentives. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hucker. And before we go to Mr. Murillo for what might be our last reporter question, we'll circle back to see if folks have any others. And I promise there's a 5-minute break coming, just a programming note for folks before we get to audience questions, just so we don't lose this thread on Thrive, because we got a couple audience questions about it, more than a couple. In fact, I'm wondering if you all could talk generally, about how it impacts housing across the board, development across the board. But I'm wondering if you could tell us specifically your thoughts on whether or not you think what it will do to advance stable quality rental housing specifically. And if you think it doesn't, what should a general plan do to advance affordable, stable quality rental housing? Y'all have sort of talked about that in the scope of the other things you talked about with Thrive, but since we are having a forum where a lot of our audiences renters, a lot of renters are wondering what it means for them specifically, and what it means for renter policy specifically. So wondering if you all could we'll give you 2 minutes. You don't have to take the whole thing, because I hope I don't mess up our timing, but wonder if you could take some time to talk about that. And I will go around in the order on my screen, so apologies for the audible, but let's start with Mr. Elrich, and then we'll go Mr. Elrich, Hucker, Riemer, and then Blair.
So I've been interested in planning and zoning for a very long time. And one of the most interesting things was looking at the master plans, general plans that were originally created. And people would be surprised to know that they actually had basic smart growth features built inside. Silver Spring and Bethesda were supposed to have businesses in the center. There was supposed to be a ring of apartments around them, which you can still see in Silver Spring and still exist in Bethesda. And they used to refer to this as housing for the workforce, which they were thinking of as the lower paid federal workers who would live in apartments. That's why some of these apartments are bigger than what they build today. And then there was the ring of residential, which they wanted less dense because they don't want everybody driving out there. They wanted a place that once you were too far from the center of jobs, you didn't want to put your population out there. You wanted your population centered. But the important thing was you could see the deliberate zoning in of affordable housing. This is different than what happens in Bethesda or anything else we've done. Some developers come along and council members say, you want a high rise? I'll give you high rise. You want more high rise? I'll give you more high rise. In the old days, the planning board said, you need to build a mixed community. So yes, there's going to be some more expensive housing over here, and there'll be bigger buildings over here, but we need to put into our plans the equivalent of garden apartments or the apartments on Bradley and Battery Lane, which parking planning wants to eliminate, where these are lower scale apartments, 2- and 3-story buildings where people can afford to live and whose rents are still way lower than the rents that are in the new buildings going up. So this plan if it's going to be the future of Montgomery County, and you know, you've got 20,000 people at 30% of AMI who can't find housing, 24,000 up to 50 who can't find housing, and 27,000 more people coming here who need subsidy, to have a plan that doesn't lay out anything about where these people are going to go kind of tells you who this plan was written for. It wasn't written for them. It's not written for the people who are coming here unless you got money in your pocket.
Thanks, Mr. Elrich. Mr. Riemer, next.
Thank you. Thrive does address housing across a whole spectrum of issues. It talks about homelessness. It says that housing is a human right. It is a housing policy advocate's best effort to envision how we can have a thriving housing market where renters will have more advantages, where they will have more options to choose from. And I'm sad to say that some of the opposition to it is driven by people who don't really want renters around. So, let's think about the politics of this a little bit. But Thrive, the goal is to rebalance the rental market, to match supply to demand. The housing shortage is squeezing all the affordable housing out of the county. And what we need to do is ensure that those 200,000 people who are going to be born here or who are going to move here, it's just population growth, that those people have adequate places to live. That's the whole goal of Thrive, is where are the people who we know are coming in the future going to live in a way that is the most equitable, the most sustainable, creates the most justice, and brings us the strongest economic development. That is the whole intent of the plan. And when we have that kind of county, then renters have a better community to live in. They have more access to jobs. They have more access to housing. They have a more stable climate to live in. So all these things go together. But a core goal of Thrive is to figure out, where do we make room for more rental housing? Because there's not enough of it. And when you want to rent a place to live in this county, it's harder to find than it should be. And so it costs more money and you have fewer choices. And Thrive wants to grapple with that problem and help solve it by figuring out where rental housing can go. And the opposition to that is opposition in favor of a housing shortage.
Thanks, Mr. Riemer. Mr. Hucker.
I agree with much of what Hans has said. That's really, if you look at Thrive, that's what it envisions, is more options both for renters and for home buyers. And that wasn't really so much of a priority in 1993. We need a whole variety of different types of homes, different financing mechanisms, different building types, different pricing, and we're not going to get out of the hole we have dug ourselves into unless we start meeting the commitment that we made to the rest of the region to build the 4,100 units a year. That's a data-driven goal. And every year that we fall behind, and we've been falling behind, seriously in the last several years, makes it harder to meet our commitment, drives up prices, both of rental units and for home buyers. And the people who are moving here need those options, especially young people, especially people of color, especially workers who are single workers and looking to buy their first home or rent their first or find an affordable place to rent for a while. Thrive, if it's properly executed, will create more of those options than we have right now.
Thanks, Mr.
Sorry, I got 45 seconds. I'm not used to this. I should also say, Hans mentioned the environment, but since I chair that committee, we have to live much more sustainably. There's not a lot of rental options in our excerpts. And most people renting don't, would like to have the option of living closer to transit. A lot of what Thrive is improves on our environmental footprint as well. Not just helps us reach our climate goals, but preserves land for agriculture, promotes better natural resource stewardship, upgrades our stormwater management, which we have a long way to go, and it's a huge job creator, and protects our water quality for the future. We need to be focusing on those things, and they're all impacted by our land use and our housing policies.
Thanks so much, Mr. Hucker. And you still had seconds to spare. And Mr. Blair, any remarks there?
Sure. So Thrive is good for renters, right? So Thrive is good for renters. And when we say renters, and I really appreciate Brandy's opening remark, opening remarks, we're really talking about us, right? Our community, our fellow residents, right? That's renters. So whether it's families or single parents or senior citizens or millennials, we're renters, right? And this is good for renters because there will be more housing. Specifically, there'll be new units that are affordably priced. And these units will be safer, right? So if you go through the plan, we're going to eliminate dangerous, traffic arteries. They'll be more walkable. There'll be more better access to transit, communities, gathering places, and most importantly, we've talked about this, jobs. But not only will there be jobs there, this is where business owners want to set up their businesses, right? Things are changing. Businesses no longer want to be in an office park off of 270. They want to be next to transit, right? It's also where, like, I have a 25-year-old son, and his dream job is off of the metro, right? That's what he wants to do. He wants to live where he can go down the elevator and jump on the metro. And so that's what Thrive is about. And bottom line, it's good for renters.
Sorry, I keep losing my mute. Thanks, Mr. Blair. All right. Well, Mr. Murillo, apologies for making you wait for my follow-up, but move to your question.
All right, well, let's go into, I guess, it's renter protections and evictions. And right now in the county, we have obviously some rules on the books when it comes to what can lead to an eviction and how that process works. But there have been pushes by some advocacy groups to have just cause ordinances, which are more strict and have more guidelines for what a landlord must meet, the threshold they must meet before an eviction can take place. So I want to give you all a second, a minute or two to get on the record on when it comes to where you think things are, when it comes to what threshold needs to be met by landlords to evict somebody, or if you think those should be more stringent, there should be more guidelines in place.
All right, and for this, we'll go in reverse order again. So we'll go Mr. Riemer, Hucker, Elrich, and Blair. And reminder, you have 2 minutes to respond, but also a reminder, you are now the only thing standing in between you and the 5-minute break. So govern yourselves how you'd like. Mr. Riemer.
Okay. Thank you for the question. Yes, I think it's important to have just cause eviction protections. And I think 2 years ago, Delegate Wilkins worked on legislation, and I was proud to support that legislation and help lead the council to support that legislation in Annapolis. We don't have the county power to do that. It's a state power. But I was pleased to, again, work with my colleagues and help bring council support for that. I'd like to just touch on an issue that matters a lot to renters who are, many people who rent have kids who are in school. And a major issue for them over the past 2 years has been how to take care of their kids during the school day. And we are right now in a very difficult moment with the prospect of most, if not all, of the schools going virtual for what could be weeks and weeks at a time. And I just think it's so crucial to support families because, renters don't just have issues with housing, they have issues with everything, as we all do: transportation, education, the environment. I mean, we're all complex people. And we have got to support everyone in this community and help kids we have got to stop harming kids, and we have got to stand and protect them and keep them in school. And in order to do that, we need leadership in the county that is incredibly active and assertive to make the conditions optimal for kids to be in school. We've got to have KN95s for kids. We've got to have vaccination requirements for those who are eligible. We've got to have air filtration and purification in the classroom. We've got to be on it. Education's got to be our top priority. That matters to people who rent too. And I promise you, as county executive, I will be involved in education. It will be my top priority.
Thanks so much, Mr. Riemer. Mr. Hucker, your 2 minutes.
Thanks, Will. Preventing evictions, Mike, is a huge priority, and it doesn't get nearly enough attention in Montgomery County right now. We have to hold ourselves to a higher standard. We're living through a crisis, and we have to act like we are. That means, number one, every single dollar that we receive for rent relief from the federal government has to go to families in need. What has been happening is our housing department siphons off 15% of those dollars for administrative costs. And that means only 85% go to families in need. It keeps me up at night to think about how many more renters we could have reached if we had maximized those dollars efficiently. They have a responsibility at DHCA to create the simplest system, the most efficient system to get dollars in the hands of the landlords to prevent evictions. We haven't done that. They're continuing to siphon 15%. That's awful. Second, I've been pushing the county executive for a year to adopt the successful strategic targeted eviction prevention program I mentioned that Baltimore County has used to keep 1,000 people from being evicted. Our current program fails in 3 ways. It waits for renters to reach a crisis before it prioritizes them. It puts the burden on individual tenants to come forward and apply for relief. And third, it diverts millions of dollars away from rent relief the administrative costs. What the STEP program does is it says, let's work with Cape Management, let's work with Southern Management, let's work with other large landlords, take the burden off individual tenants who are working 2 and 3 jobs, doing the best they can, and force the landlords to remove an entire list of people from the threat of eviction and accept a partial payment for doing it. It's been working well in Baltimore County. There's no reason it wouldn't be working here. Second, we gotta use that approach of working with renters and landlords alone and putting the burden on them to be proactive and work with people before they're facing eviction. And the third, the Renters Alliance has been calling for an eviction prevention crisis team, and the administration has still not set this up. There should be high-level decision makers from HHS, Housing Department, the Sheriff, HOC, and Legal Aid, all meeting about every case, every individual who's facing eviction to solve their problems and remove governmental barriers to keep people off the streets. That hasn't happened and it needs to happen. If I'm county executive, I'll bring that kind of urgency to this problem.
Thanks, Mr. Hucker. Thank you very much. Mr. Elrich, your 2 minutes.
So we've aggressively been managing the eviction problem, and the numbers on evictions, it never became a tsunami. It is a very low number. We prioritize those people. And if their applications were at the back of what got submitted and somebody says, I got an eviction notice, then they go to the front. We have had some success with some landlords to work with us and to take reduced payments and to work with us and give us lists in advance. There are other landlords who do not take reduced payments, and there's no way the county can force them to take reduced payments. It would be nice to do that, but it's not what all of them are willing to do. Not all of them will even cooperate with the county in terms of providing lists of people that they need rent payments for. So it is a catch and catch can, unfortunately, but we've put a lot of money out. And I have a hard time understanding in the world of spending money, Tom, they had to hire a lot of people to deal with this. We did not have adequate staff to handle this rental program, the assistance program. It's going to get paid from somewhere, whether it comes out of a federal dollar or whether it comes out of our dollar. At the end of the day, it's a dollar that's not available for something else. Kind of like, your energy bill. It's $20 million goes to, climate change. You got to figure out what you want me to take the $20 million out of, because there's a price for everything you move around. We're committed to dealing with this problem with the tenants. It's one reason I'm not anxious to spend the money that we've got reserved from the federal government, because I want to make sure we don't run out of it. I don't want people to feel like it's Christmas and we're sitting on tens of millions of dollars and then discover that this crisis is going to go on and on and on, and we're going to have to keep putting money out and out and out. So we're trying to conservatively manage our funds. We process people as quickly as we can. And if you've dealt with the federal government, you know how difficult it is. The fact that they had to change the rules on the second tranche of money and couldn't even let us put out the money under the previous rules is really frustrating for people who now have to go and create new systems.
Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Elrich. Mr. Blair, your 2 minutes.
And Will, just to verify, I'm the only thing in the way now of the 5-minute break. Is that right?
You got it. We're at your mercy.
All right. So we have a moral obligation to do everything we can to prevent evictions, and we must ensure that everyone has the access to stable, quality housing. This is a basic human right. This is also a question of fairness and equity. Evictions are a lose-lose for everyone, and we clearly need to swing the balance of the eviction process more in favor of the tenants. I support the extension of the federal emergency rental assistance as one way of guarding against evictions. And I also very much agree with Councilmember Hucker that we need to maximize those federal dollars that we can get to renters. And we can't be stifling it off at the county level. But rent isn't the only expense that our renters, our fellow residents are facing. And across the board, our county has become an incredibly expensive place to live. We convened a roundtable recently of restaurant workers, all renters, to hear their concerns and how we could best support them. And as you would guess, affordable housing came up, rent expense was certainly top of mind. But it wasn't just that. Equally, there was frustrations about our lack of reliable and efficient public transportation, how expensive parking was, the lack of affordable childcare. Even pre-K came up, which is still mind-boggling to me that a county as wealthy as Montgomery County is, we don't have universal high-quality pre-K, but clearly that's a discussion for a different forum. But needless to say, as your county executive, I'm going to take a holistic approach to supporting those that are struggling to make ends meet. Because there's no doubt we all do better when we all do better.
Thanks so much, Mr. Blair. And despite you giving us a couple seconds left, I forgot, in fairness, I have to offer rebuttals to folks. So saw Mr. Hucker's hand shoot up. So feel free to go first for your 1 minute rebuttal. And then if other folks need to use the time, feel free.
Thanks, Will. Just to follow up on what Marc said, to me, you build a budget by, budgets are moral documents. They're a statement of your priorities, and you fund the most important things first. And the most important thing in this area is eviction prevention, and not just covering the salaries at DHCA. Yes, the money has to come from somewhere, but that's why it's important to have the simplest program, because it's the most efficient and it saves the most money. Not every landlord will take a partial payment, that's true. But we know K Management will, because I've talked to them. We know Southern Management will, because we've talked to them. Just nobody's offered them that from DHCA. And if they will take a partial payment and you're saving 20% of the cost that we would be giving them, you're keeping more tenants in their home. And I'd say the same thing about the climate bill, which I'm very proud of, and Rebecca did a great job writing about on the front page of the Metro section this weekend. The fact is that we declared a climate emergency and we act like we have a little climate worry. And so, yes, you should build a budget by investing your dollars in the most important thing. And that climate bill is so good for renters because it'll put them in more cost-effective homes. Thank you.
This is a break. Appreciate you, man. Any other 1 minute rebuttals before the break for Mr. Elrich?
So this is where it's good to have experience on both the legislative and executive side of things. The council always likes to talk about how this is their budget. So and for everybody else's benefit, in 2020, we were told that we were going to do a same services budget and nothing new. In 2021, we were told no new initiatives by the council. Tom, when you raised the issue of school funding, the council sent over spending affordability guidelines that cut our bond funding in order that would have been used to build schools. So basically, you've put handcuffs on our ability to do things. You said you can't spend more capital than what we give you. You said that you cannot bring us new initiatives. We've tried to put everything into our budget that we can move around and do without triggering the objection of the council over these are new initiatives and we don't want to see them. It might have helped if you guys had met in person and, over the last 2 years, those discussions might have been more fortunate.
Thank you, Mr. Elrich.
You guys own the budget too.
Appreciate you. Any other rebuttals, Mr. Riemer, Mr. Blair? Great. All right. We are going to take a 5 minute break, just 5 minutes. And I think if it's not going to be up on the timer here, I'll have it here. But please feel free to turn your camera off, step away for a second.
Well, how late are we going?
We are going up until 9 unless we finish a little bit earlier. That's all right with folks.
Hello, I'm Nanette Hobson, CEO of Montgomery Community Media, your nonprofit resource for local news, information, and programming for and about Montgomery County. It's hard to keep up with the information you need to navigate these unprecedented times. Through it all, MCM is there for you with reliable, trustworthy news and information about your communities, schools, businesses, and government. Our Emmy award-winning team of journalists has been working virtually and safely every day, producing the vital local news you need to be informed and keep your family safe.
Every story, regardless of the language.
We tell amazing, impactful, important stories, and we're not done.
The value of this work is evident in the explosive growth of our audiences, over 200% this year over last. Our social media platforms, daily email newsletters, and mobile-friendly MyMCmedia.org website reach people with news they care about in every corner of our county. We also produce stories in Spanish.
Ponerte en los zapatos de la gente, oye, duele. Y aquí ha venido gente, personas, mujeres con niños tiernos a pedir comida. Eso me parte el alma.
Teach media classes virtually. And help other nonprofits use media to connect people in need with the resources that can help. We invite you to sign up for our e-newsletters at mymcmedia.org today and support MCM by telling your friends and neighbors about this valuable resource in our community. Join us and add your voice to platforms that are built on stories for and about you. Thank you, and please be well and stay safe.
Career success starts at Montgomery College. At MC, you can prepare for a rewarding career in these exciting fields. And if your goal is earning a bachelor's degree, starting at MC is a smart choice. MC's award-winning team supports you every step of the way with advising, tutoring, and career preparation to help you make your move. Join the thousands that are getting the education they need to succeed at Montgomery College.
welcome back, folks, as we come back from the break here. Appreciate the vigorous discussion that we've had thus far, and appreciate your allowances with some of the time. So luckily, we've been able to hit a lot of the audience questions, which is great. Our audience sent in questions leading into tonight's event. And so sorting through our questions here, one topic area that we did not get into that a lot of our audience members asked us about was about enforcement, code enforcement, and a lot of folks who track this issue and who live this issue know that for a long time, for decades even, you know, a lot of folks have felt that code enforcement in the county and the laws that protect renters in the rental housing have been weak. And so I'm wondering, as county executive, both as county executive for the four of you, what your thoughts are on code enforcement, how you would improve it going forward, and sort of what your thoughts are on the current state. And we're going to give you a minute initially, and then if there's time for follow-up, we'll try to do that. But oh, sorry, Chad fixed our clock. So actually, I think we're safe to go to 2 minutes, Chad. Sorry, production, me. But your thoughts on code enforcement and renters' rights in 2 minutes initially. And we will start, I apologize. So we'll go Hucker, Riemer, Blair, Elrich.
Thanks, Will. I'm so glad we're getting this question. This is something that's really important to me. I've seen it up close and personal when I was a tenant for a long time, and then in touring so many of the illegal housing conditions in my district, from Burtonsville to the Enclave in White Oak to all over Silver Spring. When he was on the council, I worked very closely with the county executive to fix and pass Bill 1915. And I wrote language in there that required annual inspections of every unit in our problem properties and biannual inspections of our at-risk properties, and a correction plan for each one. It was a historic step forward for tenants. And the council funded and DHCA hired more inspectors to meet the new inspection rules. But for some reason, all that went out the window over the last 2 years because the county executive and DHCA decided to end rental inspections for over a year. So mold and mildew got worse, rats and mice and roaches got worse. That sent entirely the wrong message to our least responsible landlords. And that happened at the worst time possible during a public health pandemic. Many renters were working 24/7. They're stuck at home all the time, from no reprieve from breathing in black mold, dealing with rodents all day long and night as well. Under those circumstances, we had a responsibility to double down on our frequent inspections, and instead they threw our most vulnerable tenants under the bus by ending all inspections. I spoke to Terry in the Silver Spring Towers this week, and Vicky in the Charter House, and people in the Enclave. They're still dealing with unaddressed mold and mice and other safety issues every week. And I will bring the urgency that this topic deserves to the county executive office. I'll always put the health and safety of our tenants first. I'll never cut back on inspections. I'll double down on them, because our tenants deserve all the rights and privileges and attention and care that our homeowners get in this county all the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hucker. Mr. Riemer, your 2 minutes.
Thank you. Well, this is an area where I have common ground with County Executive Elrich. I believe that rental inspections are absolutely vital to housing quality. There are many critical issues in this housing discussion, and promoting housing justice is not, as I've said many times tonight, it's not just about having housing available. It's about having good housing available. And the way to ensure that the housing that we have is of good quality, that anyone would be proud and grateful to live in, is through inspection, effective code inspection. You have to have property owners knowing that they will be held accountable if they do not maintain their quality standards. So at the committee, I've held numerous oversight hearings to understand why inspections weren't happening, as Councilmember Hucker described. And we've worked to get that back online because it wasn't working. But as county executive, supporting the workforce, and I have voted consistently to increase the funding for more inspectors, those positions that we need in order to have an adequate inspection workforce. I will ensure that we continue to have a strong inspection apparatus as the ally of the tenant. Now, of course, I'm sure there are times when tenants and inspectors may disagree on issues, but as a general philosophy, inspection is about quality, and quality is about livability, and tenants need the county to be on their side to find problems and then hold landlords who are responsible for those accountable. So that'll be a key priority for me. We'll make sure that those positions are funded and that they're adequate. And absolutely, amen on the legislation that we adopted, that Marc Elrich introduced. As I mentioned, I worked hard to support that. I thought it was a great bill, and I worked to improve it as best I could. One of the things I'm most proud of, there is a sign in your common area. I call it the Riemer sign sometimes. It has your rights there in multi languages, and that was because of my amendment.
Thanks so much, Mr. Riemer. Mr. Blair?
So it's imperative that our residents are treated with respect and that their basic housing rights, right, are defended and protected. I appreciated very much the initial efforts of our county executive on code enforcement. And then I was disappointed in the significant drop off in inspections in 2021. I mean, specifically, we saw a 25% decrease in inspections, and no doubt, that was COVID driven, right? But I would suggest, and as Councilmember Tucker alluded to, during the pandemic, the need for code enforcement was greater. And I imagine that there were more creative approaches that we could have taken that would have ensured our workers' safety, the residents' safety, and we could have maintained an appropriate level of enforcement. But let me also comment on some other aspects. One, we need to address the language barrier and ensure that undocumented residents know how they can make complaints without their status being questioned. This remains a huge issue. We need to work with trusted organizations like the Renters Alliance to communicate with these residents. I'd also love to explore ways to be more proactive. Right now, 80% of code enforcement inspections are driven from complaints. And while that level of oversight works for most, and I would suggest that most of our landlords are fair, that's not always the case. I've spent considerable time at apartment complexes. In fact, when the pandemic broke out, I was at the Middlebrook Mobile Homes Park working with them, and the conditions of those units was absolutely deplorable. The treatment from the landlords were inexcusable. I saw firsthand outrageous, unexplainable utility bills, repeated failures to maintain basic quality of living conditions, things like heat, air conditioning, and water. And for situations like that, we need to be much more aggressive. And I would work with our state's attorney to pursue all remedies under law.
Thanks, Mr. Blair. And Mr. Elrich.
There's not much to say about what happened other than COVID. And Tom, again, you surprised me. You won't go into a public meeting in your offices or in those big rooms you have because it's not safe. And you want my inspectors going into crowded apartment buildings, and that's perfectly fine. They stopped doing inspections because people didn't feel safe. And even the tenants didn't feel safe letting people into some of their apartments. So those inspections were stopped. They are now back online and they're being done. They've got a list of 112 unit buildings that are at risk, 130 buildings that are identified as troubled properties. All the troubled properties have to have a repair plan to bring themselves back up to code. All of that's going to be enforced now. If I was going to do anything to improve the situation, I'd probably increase the number of inspectors because we have too many units, I think, getting infrequent inspections. I was always a big believer that 100% of the units should get a full inspection unless you had a good enough record to be taken off of the annual inspection list. We didn't quite get there when we passed our legislation. I think it's something that we ought to think about doing going forward, because if you inspect a fraction of the units in a building, you don't know what the units look like that you didn't inspect. And that's always been something that's given me heartburn. But hopefully better budget days and the ability to spend money a little bit easier might let us bump up our inspection regime more vigorously. To me, it's one of the most heartbreaking things I deal with. I've been working on this in the city of Tacoma Park since, I guess, 1981 or 82. I know what this means to people have to live in this crap, and they should get more support. I don't disagree.
Thank you, Mr. Elrich. And unfortunately, we were right up on time. And so the good thing is that's because we had a really substantive discussion about a lot of things. And so I hope that folks who are watching at home got a chance to get a flavor on where all our candidates for county executive are on lots of issues in the housing spectrum, especially on rental housing. I apologize that I can't give folks time for a rebuttal or additional response here. I have to say thank you very much to everyone who participated. Special thanks to our reporter panel, Mike Morello from WTOP, Andrew Schatz from Bethesda Beat, and Rebecca Tan from the Washington Post. Your coverage of these critical issues continues to be a great service to the community and keeping us all informed, so we appreciate you for that. I want to thank our partners at MCMedia and Montgomery College in Germantown. We were up county in spirit for my up county folks out there. And want to remind folks that the Renters Alliance is here to help. If you are a renter that's in need of guidance, advocacy, information, you can visit us at our website, which is rentersalliance.org, or email us at info@rentersalliance.org for any information. Also want to thank our candidates for being here tonight, spending some time with us to answer these questions in great detail. I want to thank David Blair, Marc Elrich, Hans Riemer, and Tom Hucker, our candidates for county executive. And I want to wish you all safety, especially those recovering from COVID, and all of us out here, safety, and have a good night. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Will. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye now.